It started before he even woke up. The soft hum, the faint static, the murmur of voices that weren't in the room but somehow were. The kitchen light would still be off, the sky outside still a shade of deep gray, but the radio was already talking, not loudly, not to demand attention, just there. A local DJ telling the weather, a newsman reciting headlines, or sometimes just a melody that drifted down the hallway and wrapped itself around you before you even opened your eyes. The radio was the first voice we heard each day, and it made the house feel like it had already been up for hours, like it had a life of its own. Mom would be in the kitchen, her hands already dusted with flour, or scrubbing yesterday's pans, humming to the song she'd heard 100 times before. Dad might not have said a word yet, but his head would nod slightly in time with the rhythm as he drank his coffee. The radio filled in the silences we didn't know how to break. It knew what we needed before we did. When the morning was slow and heavy, it played something light. When the world outside felt too loud, it offered a calm voice in return. When no one knew what to say, it played a song that said it for us. And when the house was empty, the radio kept it from feeling alone. Even in the in-between moments before dinner, after homework, as we folded laundry or dozed off on the couch, the radio was still going. It was a low murmur in the background of our lives, narrating the ordinary, scoring the mundane. We didn't listen because we were trying to hear something. We listened because it made the house feel alive. It made the ordinary feel important. Some days it would play a song that stopped us in our tracks, a memory in melody form, something from our parents' youth, something from our own. The kind of song that made you say, "Oh, I haven't heard this in years." And suddenly the kitchen felt like a time machine. And then there were the call-in hours, people phoning in to request songs, or confess love, or complain about traffic. It was a reminder that other people were out there living, laughing, yelling into the void, and somehow hearing their voices made us feel a little less alone. The radio was never just a device. It was a heartbeat, and our house pulsed with it. The days we forgot to turn it on, they felt quieter, not in volume, in presence, like the house itself was holding its breath. Because the radio wasn't just background noise, it was the soundtrack of our growing up. It knew our mornings, our moods, our memories. It made the space between family members feel smaller. It stitched together our moments with song, voice, and warmth. We had favorite programs and favorite hosts. There was the one who always played jazz on Sunday mornings, and the one who cracked jokes just before dinner. They became like family. Their voices were as familiar as the creak in the hallway floor or the slam of the screen door. Sometimes we'd sit by the radio on purpose, not doing anything, just listening, letting it take us somewhere. A story, a song, a conversation between strangers that somehow felt like it was meant for us. The way a good radio hour could hold you like a hand on your shoulder. And during storms, when the wind howled and the rain came sideways, we'd turn the dial slowly, trying to find the clearest signal. There was something comforting about it. The idea that someone somewhere was still broadcasting, still talking, still there. When we were sick in bed or grounded in our room, the radio was our window. It reminded us that the world was still spinning outside, that people were still dancing, driving, dreaming, that life didn't stop, it just kept playing. The radio taught us patience. You had to wait for your favorite song. You had to listen through ads and news and weather. You couldn't skip ahead. You had to sit in the moment. And maybe that's why it mattered so much, because it asked you to be present. And we were. We remember the jingles that announced each show, the crackle of the weather alert tone, the way the host's voice would dip at night as if they too were tucking in for the evening. And maybe more than anything, we remember the quiet moments when a song ended and there was just silence, a second or two, long enough to feel. Just before the next voice, the next memory rolled in, the radio was always on, and the house felt more alive because of it. Even now, when we hear that same old tune in a store, or stumble across a familiar voice in a podcast, something in us lights up. We're back there, back in that kitchen, that hallway, that room where the only thing louder than the radio was the feeling of being home. And sometimes the radio didn't just fill the house, it pulled us together. There were moments when we'd all be in different rooms doing our own thing, and then a familiar song would come on. Something upbeat, something irresistible. And just like that, the hallway would fill with footsteps. The kitchen would be crowded. The living room would turn into a dance floor. No furniture rearranged, just a little scooting of socks across tile or carpet. We didn't plan it. It just happened. Maybe Mom started clapping along, or Dad tapped a rhythm on the table. Maybe someone hummed the harmony, someone else twirled a sibling, or waved their arms like a conductor. It didn't matter who started it. What mattered is that we were there together, swept up in the music like leaves in the wind. We didn't have playlists. We didn't skip tracks. We didn't control what came next. The radio taught us to take things as they came. Some songs we loved, some we tolerated, some we couldn't stand. But they were all part of the experience, a musical version of life itself, messy mixed, unpredictable. There were seasonal rhythms, too. In the fall, it seemed like the radio always played softer tunes, ones that made you look out the window a little longer. In the winter, there were cozy melodies, sentimental favorites. Spring brought pop and freshness. Summer was all about rhythm, about songs that made you open every window and let the air and sound rush in like old friends returning. And the commercials, we remember them, not fondly always, but faithfully. That one jingle for the carpet store, the guy with the ridiculous voice who sold used cars, the late-night voice that promised relationship advice or miracle vitamins. We mocked them, imitated them, but we also knew them like we knew the smell of our kitchen or the sound of the screen door. Sometimes the radio made us laugh, not big laughs, just the kind that sneak up on you, slip out your nose, and make your day better. A corny joke, a caller who lost track of what they were saying, a DJ who clearly forgot their script. And sometimes the radio made us cry. There were songs that hit different voices, that cracked with emotion, dedications from someone missing someone. One minute you're folding socks, the next your heart's in your throat because someone just played your song, one you didn't even know was yours until you heard it. It was the kind of connection that didn't need eye contact, that didn't need to be explained, just felt. The radio didn't tell us what to feel. It reminded us how to feel. And in a world that sometimes felt like it was always rushing, always demanding, the radio slowed things down. It reminded us to listen not just to the sound, but to each other, to what was said between songs, to what wasn't said at all. We didn't always agree on what station to play. There were battles over AM versus FM music, versus talk oldies, versus what was new. But somehow those arguments felt safe, familiar, like a ritual, like stretching before a walk. And then there were those golden moments when the whole family agreed, when the dial landed on something everyone could hum along to, when no one argued, when the moment was just right. We didn't have to say, "I love this one." We just turned it up. The volume knob became a kind of unspoken language. A twist to the right meant, "Pay attention." A hand hovering near it said, "This part's important." A slow fade at the end of the night meant, "We're winding down." It was part of how we learned to read a room, to sense emotion without words, to tune in not just to the radio, but to the people we lived with. And maybe that's the most magical thing the radio did. It helped us tune in to life. Even now, years later, we carry those frequencies with us. Not in the literal sense, not always as songs we remember, but as instincts, as echoes, as reminders that presence doesn't always need noise, but it's nice when it has a soundtrack. The radio taught us that life isn't always about control. Sometimes it's about leaning back, letting the moment come to you, and hearing what it has to say. Because when the radio was on, the house wasn't just a structure. It was a place where things happened, where we happened, together. And even if the music fades, and the voices grow quiet, the feeling remains. The radio was always on, and because of it, we were too. We didn't need surround sound. We had the hum of the kitchen fan, the creak of the floorboards, and the steady rhythm of the radio holding it all together like glue. Even when no one was talking, it filled in the silence with just enough company to make the house feel occupied, alive. It was like having a third parent in the room, one who didn't nag or scold, but simply reminded us that the world was bigger, wider, more rhythmic than the four walls we lived in. There were times when the radio became the backdrop for the mundane mom peeling carrots, dad thumbing through the mail, a sibling doing homework, with a pencil chewed nearly in half. But then a song would start, one that made your chest lift just a little, or pulled your mind out of the dull and into something sweeter. It turned the ordinary into something memorable. On weekends, it felt like the radio set the tone for the whole day. If a jazz tune rolled through in the morning, the eggs tasted a little classier. If it was a country twang, maybe chores felt a little more like scenes in a movie. And if disco came on, you better believe someone somewhere in the house was dancing, even if only with a broom. We learned so many songs by osmosis, not because we searched them out, but because they played again and again, until the lyrics lived in our mouths like nursery rhymes. And when we heard them again decades later in a grocery store or elevator, it was like time folded in on itself. We didn't think much of it then, but the radio was also how we learned about the world. News bulletins would interrupt our music with headlines we only half understood, names of places we couldn't locate on a map. Tragedies and triumphs alike came in between love songs and weather reports, and somehow it made everything feel connected. When a big event happened, an election, a storm, a scandal, the radio told us first. And not just what happened, but how to feel about it. The DJ's tone, the music selection afterward, even the caller reactions, they all helped us process things we didn't yet have the words for. There was something comforting in knowing that millions of others were listening to the same thing at the same time. It made the world feel smaller, more manageable, less like a spinning planet, and more like a big house where everyone had the radio on in the background. Sometimes the best moments came late at night. When the house was quiet, the lights dim, and only the radio remained. That was when the voices got softer, the music slower. It felt like the radio knew how to whisper. Those were the moments when you could lie on the couch and let your thoughts stretch out. When the problems of the day faded into the distance and all that was left was melody and memory. Even the static had its charm, that slight crackle between stations, the warble of a faraway signal. We'd twist the dial gently, trying to catch just the right sound. Sometimes in the stillness of a late Sunday evening, we'd stumble on something unexpected, a show from a different state, a song in another language, a voice that felt like it belonged in another time. We didn't realize it back then, but we were learning patience, the kind of patience that comes from waiting for your favorite song to play instead of demanding it on demand, the kind of listening that didn't skip or scroll, but stayed through the good, the bad, the static. The radio taught us to listen, but it also taught us to wait, to stay in the moment, to trust that something good might be coming next. Sometimes the radio even became a kind of therapist, not the kind with a notepad and questions, but the kind that knew just when to play a song that matched your mood. If you were feeling low, it played something that let you sit in that sadness a while longer, validating it, not fixing it. If you were riding high, it threw in a track that made your joy feel justified. It didn't solve anything, but it made you feel seen, understood, like someone somewhere got it. And every so often you'd hear a voice deep and smoky, or fast and cheerful, that became familiar. Not someone you'd ever meet, but someone who felt like a friend. A voice that popped in every morning during breakfast or kept you company while you did dishes after dinner. That voice became part of the rhythm of your day. It told you the time, the temperature, the traffic, and somehow it told you that everything was going to be okay. Because even when life was uncertain, money was tight, school was hard, relationships strained, the radio was still there, still playing, still steady, still humming in the corner like a heartbeat for the whole house. And maybe that's why even now, when everything is faster and more tailored, we miss it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was shared. Because it didn't belong to just one person. It belonged to the room, to the people in it, to the moment. The radio was always on, and it made us better listeners, not just of sound, but of each other. There was a ritual to it all. The morning station, the lunchtime news, the golden oldies that floated in around dinner time like familiar guests returning. We didn't write it down or consciously follow a schedule, but the radio played like clockwork. It was so consistent that its absence would have felt louder than its presence. When the power went out, or when someone forgot to turn it on, the house felt off, like something essential had been left behind. The radio was a companion during chores. It made folding laundry less tedious, scrubbing floors less lonely, and cooking feel like a small performance. We sang into wooden spoons, twirled dish towels like props, and let the music carry us from one task to the next. It wasn't about being good at dancing or singing. It was about being present. The music made the work feel lighter, and the joy more generous. Then came the requests. Remember those calling into a station, waiting for a real human voice to answer, and hoping your song would get played? You'd sit close to the speaker finger on the record button of your cassette deck, ready to capture the magic. And when the DJ finally said your name on air, maybe even dedicated the track to your crush, it felt like winning the lottery. That moment was yours, beamed across invisible airwaves, connecting hearts and hopes and teenage dreams. But the radio wasn't just for the young. It was for the elders, too. Grandpa had his afternoon programs, talk shows where opinions clashed and jokes landed dry. Grandma preferred the soft crooners, the sentimental ballads that brought a mist to her eyes. They each had their time with the radio, and through it they each found their own kind of companionship. Even in silence, even alone, they weren't truly alone. And when company came over, the radio stayed on just a little lower. It hummed in the background, weaving conversations together with melody. Sometimes the right song would float through at just the right moment, underscoring a memory in real time. Years later, we'd hear that same song again, and boom, we'd be back in that kitchen with that laughter, that smell of coffee or chicken roasting, that sense of belonging. On long drives, the radio became a storyteller. We'd scan stations as the miles rolled by, each frequency offering a new flavor, a new accent, a different worldview. It was a passport and a time machine, tuning us into distant cities and distant decades. And sometimes it was a lifeline, bringing storm warnings, traffic alerts, or just a familiar voice reminding us we weren't lost. Even in heartbreak, the radio held space for us. Those late-night shows with slow songs and sympathetic hosts, the ones who read letters from the broken-hearted and played tracks that knew exactly where it hurt. We cried with strangers, loved with strangers, healed with strangers, all because of the radio. And when the holidays came, the house transformed. It wasn't the tinsel or the tree that kicked things off. It was the first Christmas song on the radio. That unmistakable jingle, that warm voice reminding us of chestnuts and sleigh bells. It signaled something more than just a season. It meant togetherness. It meant time was about to slow down, if only for a while. What we didn't understand back then was this: the radio was teaching us how to feel, how to sit with emotion, how to let joy in, how to let sorrow pass through. It was emotional literacy set to music. And whether we were 6 or 60, the lessons stuck. Even today, in a world of playlists and podcasts and digital noise, there's something about a radio, an old one, dusty on a shelf, or humming in a garage, that pulls us back. Back to a time when we didn't control the soundtrack, when we waited for songs, when we listened with our hearts, not just our ears. Because the radio wasn't just background noise, it was the pulse of our home, a steady presence, a keeper of memory, a reminder that life, real, messy, beautiful life, was happening all around us, and it was worth listening to. In the end, the radio wasn't just something we turned on. It was something we tuned into emotionally, spiritually, rhythmically. It gave our days a soundtrack and our lives a sense of flow. You could measure the mood of the house by the volume and the genre. A quiet jazz afternoon meant calm. A rock anthem blasting mid-morning, someone needed motivation. And sometimes the radio said the things we couldn't. A love song would say what we felt, but were too shy to speak. A sad song gave us permission to cry. An upbeat tune let us dance out frustration when words wouldn't do. The radio was our translator, taking raw emotion and turning it into something we could move to. We carried that radio feeling with us into our relationships, our work, our parenting. We learned to listen without needing to respond. to hear what was beneath the words. We learned that background noise often contains the deepest truths. Even now, with everything on demand and nothing left to chance, there's a strange comfort in not choosing, in flipping on the radio and letting the universe decide the next song, in stumbling on a tune we haven't heard in decades, in discovering a story we never would have searched for. That's what the radio gave us: surprise, serendipity. That little thrill when your favorite song came on, not because you clicked it, but because it found you. That reminder that good things sometimes just show up unplanned and perfectly timed. The radio also taught us generosity. You couldn't hog the dial. Everyone had a favorite station, a favorite time. We compromised. We took our turns. We tolerated the static of someone else's taste, and sometimes we learned to love it. The radio made us better sharers, and the voices, oh, those voices, they stayed with us. Some we can still mimic. Others live only in the texture of memory. But we remember how they made us feel: safe, seen, less alone. It's funny how something so small could hold so much. How a box with a dial and a speaker could stretch across time and distance and pull people into the same moment. Maybe that's the magic of it. The radio didn't demand our attention. It earned it. It was always there, ready, steady. Not flashy, not curated, just faithful. And when we look back now at all the things that made a house a home, we think of the couch, the kitchen table, the smell of pancakes, and the sound of the radio, humming softly in the background, playing the score to our growing up. It wasn't just the music that mattered. It was the pauses, the commercials, the goofy jingles that became inside jokes. It was the way your mom would hum along without realizing it, the way your dad would tap his finger on the steering wheel in perfect rhythm. It was how a certain DJ's laugh made you smile, even if you didn't catch the joke. Sometimes the radio made you feel seen, like when it played a song that captured exactly what you were feeling that day. It felt like a little secret message from the world saying, "I get you." That mattered more than we realized. And then there were the quiet nights when the rest of the house had gone to bed, and it was just you and that low crackle of a late-night station. It felt like the whole world had softened, that you were connected to something bigger, something tender. The radio was whispering, "You're not alone." We remember birthdays made better by the song that happened to come on during cake cutting. We remember the time your crush's name was mentioned on air and the squeal that escaped your mouth. We remember learning lyrics not from apps or lyric videos, but by listening closely, rewinding tapes, playing them again and again, until we got it just right. And even as new technologies came, the radio remained. Sometimes in the car, sometimes in the garage, sometimes just playing in the kitchen while you made coffee on a Sunday morning. It didn't need to be center stage. It just needed to be there. Because yes, the radio was always on. And maybe in a way it still is. And maybe the reason we keep coming back to it, whether it's talk radio on a long drive or a scratchy oldies station in the corner of a diner, is because we still crave that feeling, that sense that someone out there is sending out signals, hoping someone like us is tuned in, that we're not just talking into the void. That connection, even invisible, is real. Because every home has its rhythm. Some have the tick of a clock, others the hum of a fridge. But for us it was the radio, always steady, always present, always playing the background music to our lives, and somehow making those lives feel a little more whole. The thing about the radio was that it never asked for your full attention, but it always earned a piece of your heart. It was like an old friend who dropped by, unannounced, stayed just long enough, and always brought a story worth hearing. You could be folding laundry, cooking dinner, or doing absolutely nothing, and the radio would be there keeping you company without needing anything in return. Sometimes the radio was just background noise, but other times it felt like the main event, like when your favorite song came on and you ran to turn it up, or when you heard a breaking news alert and froze in place, or when a radio host said something so funny you laughed out loud in the middle of an empty room. And there were those rare magical moments when the radio felt personal, like it had chosen a song just for you, like it knew you needed a memory or a message or a melody to get through the day. It was uncanny how often it got it right, as if the airwaves were in tune with your heartbeat. Back then we didn't skip songs. We didn't scroll past. We waited. We listened. We gave things a chance. And sometimes those surprises became our favorites. Songs we never would have picked on our own became part of our story, because the radio offered them up without asking for anything in return. And the stories, oh, the stories. The radio had a way of capturing voices from faraway places and bringing them right into our living room. Late-night call-ins, morning weather reports, the sound of baseball games echoing through summer afternoons. It was a kind of magic hearing people you'd never meet, telling tales you'd never live, but still feeling like they were speaking directly to you. The radio also gave us rituals, like tuning in every Saturday morning for the countdown show, or waiting for the school cancellations during snow season, or listening for the shout-outs during the birthday hour. These were not just moments of entertainment. They were anchors in our routine signals that tied us to the rhythm of the week. You could tell a lot about a house by its radio. Some homes leaned into country twang. Others vibed with smooth jazz. Some bounced with bubblegum pop. But whatever the genre, it told a story about the people who lived there, their tastes, their moods, their dreams. And when guests came over, the radio played host. It set the mood for dinner parties and backyard barbecues. It welcomed visitors with warmth and rhythm. It filled awkward silences and sparked spontaneous sing-alongs. It knew how to read the room better than most people did. Over time, we memorized the radio's quirks, the way some stations faded out in bad weather, the exact time the news jingle would play, the funny way the DJ pronounced certain names. These little imperfections made it more human, more endearing. In a world that's become polished and on demand, those rough edges are what we miss most. The radio was also a time capsule. It caught the mood of the moment and saved it in sound. You hear a certain song now and you're instantly back in your childhood kitchen or your dad's old truck, or that summer vacation with your cousins. The radio made memories sticky. It gave them a soundtrack. And even now, decades later, some of us still keep a radio on, not because we need it, but because we want it. Because silence feels too empty. Because music still matters. Because voices in the air still mean something. So yes, the radio was always on. And when it was, the house wasn't just filled with sound. It was filled with life. Even now, as we tap on screens and scroll through endless playlists, there's a part of us that longs for the randomness, for the imperfections, for the shared experience of knowing a whole town might be hearing the same song at the same time. for that unspoken connection, thin as air but strong as memory. Because the radio wasn't just a machine. It was a member of the family, and it's no surprise we still remember the way it made us feel heard, held, and home. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing of all. It made our houses feel less like structures and more like sanctuaries. It reminded us that we were never truly alone, because somewhere out there someone else was listening too. And on quiet evenings now, when the wind rattles the windows and the house creaks with age, turning on the radio can feel like lighting a candle. A small act of warmth, a soft glow in the dark. Proof that some things, good things, never fully leave us. They just change frequency. You might not remember the exact songs, but you'll remember how they made you feel. And in the end, maybe that's what home really is, a feeling carried on a wave, invisible but strong, waiting for someone to tune in. There were moments when the radio became our teacher, before the internet, before Google, before smartphones could answer every random question in an instant. The radio filled in the blanks. You'd learn who won the game last night, what the weather might do tomorrow, or which song just topped the charts. It was knowledge, wrapped in melody updates, laced with personality. Some voices on the radio became iconic in our households. We never met them in person, but we knew them, knew the sound of their laugh, the rhythm of their speech, their go-to jokes or favorite sayings. These radio hosts were familiar like neighbors, and in a way they were. They lived in the corners of our kitchens, our garages, our cars. They were there when we were up late, working, or early to rise before the sun. They narrated our lives one broadcast at a time. And it was not just about music or news. It was the ads, too, the jingles that got stuck in your head for days, the local business owners who recorded their own awkwardly charming promos, the booming voice promising low prices and friendly service. You couldn't fast forward them, but you didn't need to. They were part of the rhythm, part of the town, part of the charm. Even the static had character. There were certain places in the house where the signal was just a little fuzzy. You'd turn the knob ever so slowly, trying to catch the station just right. Sometimes you'd stick a piece of foil on the antenna, or tilt it toward the window. It felt like tuning into something cosmic, like searching for a message from the ether. When you left the house, the radio came with you. It lived in the dashboard of every car worth its wheels. Long drives weren't complete without a soundtrack. There was a kind of intimacy in driving down empty roads at night headlights, glowing, and your favorite song playing through crackly speakers. It felt like a secret between you and the stars. Kids today might not understand the thrill of waiting for your favorite song to come on, of calling in with a request, and then waiting, hoping, praying to hear your name on air. When it happened, when the DJ actually played your song and shouted you out, it felt like winning a prize, like the universe had taken notice. The radio taught us patience, taught us how to listen not just to music, but to other people, to their stories, their heartbreaks, their celebrations. It was a window into the lives of strangers that somehow made our own lives feel less strange. And every once in a while there was a moment, just a small one, when everything lined up. The perfect song came on the sunlight, hit the room just right, and for a few minutes the world felt soft and bearable and good, like maybe everything was going to be okay, like the radio knew something we didn't and was gently trying to tell us. We didn't need perfect sound quality, perfect. We didn't need endless choice. We just needed something real, something that felt alive. And that's what the radio gave us over and over again. Even now there are people who keep an old radio on the windowsill or in the workshop, not because they have to, but because it reminds them of something, of someone, of a time when connection was simpler, when hearing a voice through the static felt like a lifeline. So we keep listening, not out of habit, but out of hope. Hope that the next song might bring back a forgotten memory, that the next voice might remind us of who we were, that the next broadcast might make this world feel just a little less lonely. Because the radio was never just about sound, it was about presence. And in a world full of noise, it gave us something more rare companionship. And maybe that's what kept the house alive all along. There's something poetic about how we used to gather around that small box of wires and wonder what song would come next, wonder where the host was broadcasting from, wonder how many other people were listening at that exact same moment. It was a shared experience, wrapped in mystery. Not knowing was part of the beauty. Sometimes the radio was your only company. On lonely nights, during long work shifts, when the world outside was too quiet, the voice on the other end reminded you that someone else was out there somewhere talking just for you. And that meant something. It's easy now to overlook it all. With our playlists and podcasts with endless choice and skip buttons. But maybe that's why we miss it. The lack of control gave it power. The randomness gave it magic. You didn't choose the song chose you. And in those accidental pairings, those unpredictable moments was where the radio lived. That's where it breathed. That's where it made us feel alive. Sometimes we didn't even notice the radio was on until it wasn't. That sudden silence would hit like a missing heartbeat. The hum of life was gone, and the air felt too still. It was in those quiet gaps that we realized just how much it filled the space. Not with noise, but with company. It played when we cooked. The kitchen smelled of onions and garlic and something baking, and the radio added seasoning to it all. Morning shows with upbeat chatter, midday music, that made the chopping go faster, afternoon interviews with authors you'd never heard of but somehow ended up caring about. You'd stir the soup and learn about a civil rights activist or a new book or a concert coming to town. And the radio had a way of making everyday life feel cinematic. You'd be sweeping the floor and then a perfectly timed Motown track would turn your broom into a dance partner. Or you'd be folding laundry and find yourself singing along to a ballad you didn't even know you knew. It gave the day rhythm, gave the mundane a backbeat. There was something sacred about certain times of day. Morning news, noon farm reports, evening jazz, late-night confessionals from people baring their hearts to anonymous hosts. The radio was a clock, a ritual, a metronome for memory. It marked time, not in minutes, but in moods. Sometimes the best memories weren't even about the songs, they were about where you were when they played. You remember the summer it felt like one song was always on, or the day someone broke your heart, and the radio somehow knew to play the saddest thing ever written. It didn't fix anything, but it made you feel seen. There were stories, talk shows that made you think, call-ins where someone's bad day became a whole town's concern. People you didn't know became voices you recognized. They laughed like you. They cried like you. They wondered and hoped and ranted like you. And even if you were alone in the room, the radio made sure you never really felt it. And on holidays, oh, the holidays, the radio turned into a magic box. Christmas carols drifting through the cold Halloween soundtracks, with just the right level of spooky Thanksgiving specials filled with stories and gratitude. It stitched traditions together one broadcast at a time. Even commercials became memory, You'd hear one today and be instantly transported. The jingle for a long-gone diner. The goofy voice that advertised a tire shop that's now a coffee bar. They're echoes of who we were and what we found important enough to repeat over the air. And the voices, they aged with us. The DJ who used to sound so young now had a slower cadence, a touch of gravel. And we didn't mind, because we were aging too. And hearing them age made it feel okay. And sometimes in the quietest moments, you'd sit near that little box and just listen. Not for anything in particular. Not for the news or the music, but for the feeling that something was happening, that life somewhere was moving forward, and you were still part of it. Even today, when so much has gone digital and silent and private, there's still something beautiful about turning the dial and hearing something real, live, imperfect, unscripted. That's where the soul is. Because the radio didn't just fill the house with sound. It filled it with life. And maybe that's why we kept it on. Not because we needed background noise, but because we needed background meaning. So even now, in the age of algorithms and autoplay, there's a certain kind of comfort in hearing someone say, "Thanks for listening," because they mean it, and because you are. And somewhere someone else is too. Maybe the real magic of radio was never about what was playing. It was about who we were while it played. We were dreamers, workers, lovers, fighters, listeners. It became the soundtrack to our growth, the score beneath our transformations. Each crackly note tied to a memory, a season, a version of ourselves we forgot existed. You didn't just hear a song. You heard that one summer when you felt free, that fall when you found love, that winter when everything felt a little too quiet until a voice on the radio said, "You're not alone." And maybe that's why decades later some of us still reach for the dial, not because we're stuck in the past, but because the past somehow made room for us. It spoke to us, sang to us, sat with us through both chaos and calm, so we carry it with us, not just the device, but the feeling, the soundtrack of 1,000 tiny moments stitched together by sound waves and sincerity. And in doing so, the house remains alive, not with noise, but with memory. And in the summer when the windows were open and the curtains danced in the breeze, the radio wasn't just for the house. It was for the whole block. It mixed with the chirping of cicadas, the clink of ice in glasses, the sound of kids playing tag in the front yard. Sometimes a neighbor would yell from across the street, "Turn that one up," and you did. Because some songs didn't belong to just one person. They were shared property, a neighborhood anthem, a reason to sing out loud off-key together. We didn't always agree on what to listen to. Dad liked the sports station. Mom preferred soft jazz. We kids begged for pop hits or funny skits. So compromises were made. Stations were changed. But in the end, it wasn't about the content. It was the comfort, the consistency. The radio was like the kitchen light you always left on it, just made the house feel safe. There were radios in every room. One in the kitchen, one in the bathroom that played while you brushed your teeth, one in the garage where Grandpa tinkered with his tools and hummed along to golden oldies. Even the car had one, and somehow the drive always felt shorter when the right song came on just as you hit the highway. It was more than sound. It was companionship, reassurance, a steady presence in a world that kept changing. Long before we had playlists or podcasts or satellite stations, the radio gave us a sense of place, a sense of belonging. You weren't just in your home. You were in a story, a scene, a moment made richer by melody. And when storms rolled in, the radio became our lifeline. Not just for updates or warnings, but for calm. A familiar voice saying, "We're in this together." Static-filled, maybe, but steady, dependable, human. It reminded you that even in darkness there was still a signal, still a song, still a voice reaching out. We remember those voices now like we remember relatives. The DJs with their catchphrases, the late-night hosts who whispered comfort through the static, the morning crews who laughed too loud but made you smile anyway. They weren't just talking into a microphone. They were talking to us. Because the radio knew something the world sometimes forgets. The connection doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. There was a kind of quiet respect we gave the radio. We didn't interrupt it when it was speaking. We turned it up when someone said something profound. We hummed along when it played a favorite tune, and sometimes we cried when the lyrics hit too close to home. It wasn't just a device, it was part of the family. It kept us company on rainy afternoons when the sky turned gray and the house felt too big. It played soft songs that matched the sound of raindrops tapping against the window like a duet between nature and memory. Those were the days you'd curl up with a blanket sip, something warm, and just listen, not because the world outside was silent, but because the world inside had something to say. Sometimes the radio helped us speak when we didn't have words. A song could say what we were too shy to admit. A story could help us feel what we didn't know how to name. The radio had a way of translating emotion into something tangible, something you could turn up, something you could hold if only for a few minutes. And we learned from it, too, not in the formal way of textbooks, but in the accidental way of curiosity. We learned about wars and peace treaties, about distant cities and local fairs. We heard accents from places we'd never been, and felt, for a moment, like we were part of something bigger. It connected us to the world, to each other, to parts of ourselves we hadn't yet met. Even the static had meaning. That crackle between stations, that fuzzy nothingness. It reminded us that something was out there, even if we couldn't hear it clearly. We'd twist the dial slowly, carefully, hoping to land on a station where someone was waiting to say hello. There were times when the radio became our timeline. We marked events not just by dates, but by broadcasts. Remember when they played that tribute after the fire? Remember the song that played the night you came home from the hospital? The radio was there for the moments that mattered, and for the ones we didn't realize mattered until much later. And in the middle of the night, when the world was still and sleep wouldn't come, the radio was a lighthouse. Soft voices, slow melodies, a kind of hush that told you it was okay to feel lonely, that someone somewhere was awake too. That maybe in the quiet darkness we were not alone at all. Kids today might not understand that kind of magic. To them sound comes on demand. Playlists are curated. Silence is filled instantly. But the radio made us wait. It made us listen. It made us discover. And in that slowness we found depth. We found ourselves. Even now, when a familiar tune plays, we're transported. We're back in that kitchen, that car, that living room with worn-out couches and a stack of old newspapers. The radio was more than sound. It was scent, sight, memory. It was the clink of dishes, the rustle of the curtain, the echo of footsteps in the hall. It was presence. It was the sound of pancakes sizzling on Sunday mornings paired with golden oldies or a preacher's soft voice. It was the rustle of Dad's newspaper folding shut when a news bulletin broke in. It was Mom, humming along while ironing shirts for the week. It was us feet swinging off the edge of the couch, lost in a drama we only half understood but fully felt. And the house, our house, was never really quiet because the radio was always on, always singing, always remembering. And perhaps the greatest gift it gave us was the permission to feel, to sit with sadness and joy, with longing and laughter without rushing to the next thing. It reminded us that being human was about tuning in to each other, to the world, and to ourselves. And in that quiet act of listening we found connection, real, lasting, imperfectly beautiful connection. Because long after the batteries die, the antennas break, and the stations go silent, we still carry the broadcast in us, the voice that told stories, the melody that lifted a heavy day, the static that meant something was just beyond reach, worth waiting for. It stays echoing in the corners of memory, and in that way the radio never really turns off. It just becomes part of who we are. And even now, when we walk into a quiet room and flip on a station, any station, it's not just for sound. It's a ritual, a return, a reaching back towards something we knew and loved. It's a way of saying, I remember, I still care, I still hear you. Because maybe, just maybe, the house never really stopped feeling alive. It was just waiting for the radio to play again. In the golden slant of afternoon light, we sometimes caught the reflection of ourselves in the radio's chrome trim. It was subtle, just a glimmer, but enough to remind us we were there too, part of the moment. Not just hearing the music, but reflected in it, wrapped up in the warmth of voices we had never met, but somehow trusted. The radio, in its own quiet way, made us feel seen. It also made us feel timeless. There were days when it played big band swing, and suddenly the kitchen floor became a dance hall. Other times it crooned out doo-wop harmonies or rock ballads, and we were teenagers again, holding hands under the table. The music didn't just fill the air, it changed the temperature of memory. One note, and we were back there in high-top sneakers or saddle shoes, mouthing the lyrics we had once scribbled on notebook covers. And it taught us patience. The song we loved wasn't always next. We waited. We hoped. And when it finally came on, when that first recognizable note hit our ears, it felt like a personal gift from the universe. We didn't skip it or shuffle it. We savored it. The radio also had this way of uniting people who were otherwise divided. Politics, opinions, age gaps, they all softened under a shared song. Grandpa and granddaughter tapping toes to the same beat. Dad nodding along while Mom sang out loud. Even disagreements paused for a commercial break. For a few minutes, music dissolved the distances between us. Sometimes the radio was the only thing awake with us. In moments of insomnia or worry, when sleep hid in the shadows, we turned the dial and found comfort. The late-night DJ, with a voice like warm flannel, reminded us that we weren't the only ones still thinking, still feeling. It was a strange kind of companionship, anonymous but intimate, and there were rituals. The turning of the knob in the morning before the toast popped, the midday hum of tunes while the vacuum roared in the other room, the Saturday countdowns, the Christmas specials, the static during thunderstorms. Each moment stitched into the fabric of our routines, making the ordinary feel sacred. Even silence was different when the radio was near. It had texture, weight. It wasn't empty. It was a pause between stories, a breath before the chorus. It told us that something was coming, something worth staying for. When guests visited, the radio often became the background to conversation. A subtle presence, never overpowering, but always there. It added rhythm to our words, punctuated laughter, caught the quiet when no one knew what to say, and somehow it made those silences feel less awkward, more shared. The cords may have frayed, the antenna may have bent, the stations may have shifted, but the spirit of that little box of sound stayed with us, in the way we still reach for music when words fail, in the way a certain voice or melody can bring us to tears without warning or explanation. We pass that down, too, to kids and grandkids who might not understand why we get misty-eyed at the intro of a forgotten hit, who might roll their eyes when we say, "This was our song." But maybe someday they'll find their own version of that radio. Something that hums softly in the corner of their lives and makes them feel less alone. And maybe they'll understand. Because it wasn't just about the music. It was about presence. It was about knowing that even in the chaos of the world, something steady waited for us. Something that didn't need a screen or a password, just a dial, a voice, a song. So when we remember the radio, we remember ourselves. Younger, perhaps, or just more open, willing to listen, to wonder, to be moved. And that part of us, like the signal from an old AM station, keeps bouncing through the atmosphere, long after the house has emptied, long after the radio has gone silent, still echoing, still alive, still playing, because some songs don't end. They fade, and then they return when you need them most. And the house never forgets the music. It just waits patiently for the next chorus to begin.